Welcome to another Thursday night Bible study, brought to you as a ministry of SIGBC.
Be content. Now, our church motto for this year is be grateful, and part of being content involves being grateful for God's many, many blessings along the way. We are content when we acknowledge that God provides and God is good. And sometimes even when we don't understand why we have to go through what we have to go through, we can still be content in God's goodness. Right now, my son, who is raising his support to come to Japan as a missionary, he and his wife, Stephanie, and their 4 kids are living in a travel trailer while they're trying to raise their support. And as it turns out, there were some families that they were able to meet through their mobile home lifestyle that ran into some legal difficulties. And so, long story short, Stephanie and Nathan ended up hosting these children and caring for them and providing a place to live, in spite of the fact that they had 4 kids of their own and were now having to care for 3 or 4 other children. Happy to do it. I know they are. But a lot more involved in caring for 7 or 8 kids than in caring for 3 or 4 kids. And then it happened. Evidently cold weather is going through South Carolina as well, and their water stopped. And it was colder than expected, and so their propane ran out. And so last I heard, they were sleeping okay, but it was really, really cold, and they had no propane, and they had no water, and they were caring for all these kids. And poor Stephanie, I'm sure she's almost at her wit's end. And it is in such situations like this when it becomes all the more important to recognize the goodness of God and to be grateful for what God has provided and to be content with such things as we have. I remember years ago reading a story, and I've shared this story on occasion over the years, but I remember reading a story about a mother of 3 kids who her husband had passed, and she was living on a very, very meager means, living in a house that had cracks in the walls, and they had no heat, and it was in the middle of the winter, and it was so cold that nothing they could do would get them warm. And so finally, in order to make the wind that was blowing through the cracks in the house and making everything even colder, in order to decide that, she called her kids and she said, "Hey kids, let's all come over here and get in the corner of the room." And so they all got in the corner of the room, and they piled on the blankets, and then she took the door off of its hinges and brought it over and set it in front of them and blocked the cold wind from blowing over them. And immediately the kids became more comfortable. And the oldest son, as I recall, was quoted as saying, "Mom, this is so nice. What do people do who don't have a door?" In other words, in every circumstance we find ourselves in life, it is possible for us to choose to be content. And so last week we looked at the subject of be content from the Hebrews chapter 13 verses 5 through 6. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." So we can say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" And we saw 3 aspects of this particular passage. Number one, we are called to keep our lives free from the love of money. And number two, we are called to be content with what we have. And number three, we are called to keep our lives free from the love of money and be content with what we have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Be content. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 9, verses 7 through 10, we read our next contemplation on the subject of the importance of being content. In Ecclesiastes, chapter 9, Ecclesiastes, of course, being the book of the Bible that was written by Solomon in his questioning, or after passing through a questioning stage in life, where he began to conclude, meaningless, everything is meaningless in this life. Of course, in the end, he concluded that there is meaning in life. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before you get old and life takes its toll on you. And then he said the conclusion of the matter of this is this: fear the Lord. So in this contemplative stage in chapter 9, where he's still going through the meaningless, all is meaningless, he says, go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life, and in your toilsome labor under the sun. You see, Solomon was here saying life is difficult, but in spite of the struggles and difficulties that we find in life, we can also find pleasures in the things that we are called to experience. And he says, eat, drink, enjoy relationships with one another. In other passages, he gives one more. Actually, Solomon concludes, in addition to the ultimate goal in life being to fear God and serve him, he concludes there are joys and pleasures that we can experience in life, such as meaningful productivity, that is, accomplishing something with purpose, something that helps others. And I often talk about this meaningful purpose that we are called to fulfill, that gives us purpose and meaning in life. Talk about, for example, even flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. One might think, well, this is as menial a task as you can get to do, flipping burgers at McDonald's, or any other fast food burger joint for that matter. But until you realize that you are actually flipping burgers at McDonald's, you're actually fulfilling an important purpose in serving other people. Because why do people go to McDonald's? Well, because it's tasty, it's fast, and it's not as expensive as other places. And so you can get a fast, tasty, economical meal thanks to the guy who flips your burgers. And so it is meaningful, and it is productive, and it's a source. That fact that we are serving others in what we are called to do is a source of joy. So he says, eat your food with gladness, drink with a joyful heart, enjoy your relationship with others. Again, the three things were meaningful productivity, the food that God has provided for us, and relationships that God allows us to enjoy in life. These are the three things that do, Solomon concludes, give us a sense of purpose and therefore happiness in life. And so he says, be content with such things as you have. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, Paul writes to Timothy, but remember, he's talking here about money, and I would love to share a whole message just on this one passage, chapter 6 of 1 Timothy, but we're just talking about contentment today. But he gives 4 observations concerning money. And one of those is, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. We have, in today's lifestyle and societal norms, we have moved way beyond being happy with food and clothing. We have moved to being unhappy when the internet shuts down for 30 minutes. We've moved to being unhappy when we don't get to go out to eat at the fancy restaurant because we couldn't get a reservation. We become unhappy when we run out of gas. Forgetting the fact that we're driving a nice car and we're in the comfort of a vehicle that God has provided. No, we can choose to complain, or we can choose to be content in every aspect of life, no matter what our circumstances. The richest person in the world can still find something to complain about, and the poorest person in the world can still find that for which to be content. And so, when Paul says we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it, so what's the point in worrying about the things that are in the world? If we have food and clothing, let's be content with that. And then finally, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 10 through 13, we read, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me, Paul says to the Philippians. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret to being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me the strength. Let's contemplate that for just a couple of minutes, and then we'll be done for today. Paul begins by expressing joy, that is, genuine rejoicing over the fact that someone had taken a concern in his situation in life. Happy to suffer, happy to struggle, happy to sacrifice in service of God, but rejoicing that they had renewed their concern for him in a tangible way. And he says, I'm not saying this because I'm happy that you gave me a gift. No. He says, it's not because I have a need, because I've already learned that whatever circumstances I find myself in, I've learned to be content. And he says, yeah, in my life, I have experienced need. I have experienced great need. I know what it is to be in need. And he says, also, I have learned that having plenty is also fun. And having all your needs met, being able to have 3 meals a day and a place to sleep and enjoying the fellowship with fellow believers, that is a source of joy as well. But he says, just because I'm in need doesn't mean I'm not going to be content. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret to being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. He says, let me share this secret with you. He says, in every situation, whatever the circumstance, I can do all things, all these things. That is, be content in times of need and be content in times of plenty. I can do all this. Why? Because God gives me the strength to have emotional stability regardless of the circumstances. So here's God's call. Choose to be content. Yeah, sometimes we struggle. Sometimes it's rough. Sometimes we enjoy so much good. You know what Paul says to Timothy in Timothy chapter 6? To tell those who are rich, make sure you're willing to share the blessings that God has bestowed. So many wonderful truths about the importance of being content for the believer.
Thank you for listening. You can also join us in person or live on Facebook every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Japan time. This has been a ministry of Sakahogi International Grace Baptist Church.